Paper 102. The Foundations of Religious Faith. To the unbelieving materialist, man is simply an evolutionary accident. His hopes of survival are strung on a figment of mortal imagination. His fears, loves, longings, and beliefs are but the reaction of the incidental juxtaposition of certain lifeless atoms of matter. No display of energy nor expression of trust can carry him beyond the grave. The devotional labors and inspirational genius of the best of men are doomed to be extinguished by death, the long and lonely night of eternal oblivion and soul extinction. Nameless despair is man's only reward for living and toiling under the temporal sun of mortal existence. Each day of life slowly and surely tightens the grasp of a pitiless doom, which a hostile and relentless universe of matter has decreed shall be the crowning insult to everything in human desire which is beautiful, noble, lofty, and good. But such is not man's end and eternal destiny. Such a vision is but the cry of despair uttered by some wandering soul who has become lost in spiritual darkness, and who bravely struggles on in the face of the mechanistic sophistries of a material philosophy, blinded by the confusion and distortion of a complex learning. And all this doom of darkness and all this destiny of despair are forever dispelled by one brave stretch of faith on the part of the most humble and unlearned of God's children on earth. This saving faith has its birth in the human heart, when the moral consciousness of man realizes that human values may be translated in mortal experience from the material to the spiritual, from the human to the divine, from time to eternity. 1. Assurances of faith. The work of the thought adjuster constitutes the explanation of the translation of man's primitive and evolutionary sense of duty into that higher and more certain faith in the eternal realities of revelation. There must be perfection hunger in man's heart to ensure capacity for comprehending the faith paths to supreme attainment. If any man chooses to do the divine will, he shall know the way of truth. It is literally true. Human things must be known in order to be loved, but divine things must be loved in order to be known. But honest doubts and sincere questionings are not sin. Such attitudes merely spell delay in the progressive journey toward perfection attainment. Childlike trust secures man's entrance into the kingdom of heavenly ascent. But progress is wholly dependent on the vigorous exercise of the robust and confident faith of the full-grown man. The reason of science is based on the observable facts of time. The faith of religion argues from the spirit program of eternity. What knowledge and reason cannot do for us, true wisdom admonishes us to allow faith to accomplish through religious insight and spiritual transformation. Owing to the isolation of rebellion, the revelation of truth on Urantia has all too often been mixed up with the statements of partial and transient cosmologies. Truth remains unchanged from generation to generation, but the associated teachings about the physical world vary from day to day and from year to year. Eternal truth should not be slighted because it chances to be found in company with obsolete ideas regarding the material world. The more of science you know, the less sure you can be. The more of religion you have, the more certain you are. The certainties of science proceed entirely from the intellect. The certitudes of religion spring from the very foundations of the entire personality. Science appeals to the understanding of the mind. Religion appeals to the loyalty and devotion of the body, mind, and spirit, even to the whole personality. God is so all-real and absolute that no material sign of proof or no demonstration of so-called miracle may be offered in testimony of His reality. Always will we know Him because we trust Him, and our belief in Him is wholly based on our personal participation in the divine manifestations of His infinite reality. The indwelling thought adjuster unfailingly arouses in man's soul a true and searching hunger for perfection, together with a far-reaching curiosity, which can be adequately satisfied only by communion with God, the divine source of that adjuster. The hungry soul of man refuses to be satisfied with anything less than the personal realization of the living God. Whatever more God may be than a high and perfect moral personality, he cannot in our hungry and finite concept be anything less. 2. Religion and reality. Observing minds and discriminating souls know religion when they find it in the lives of their fellows. Religion requires no definition. We all know its social, intellectual, moral, and spiritual fruits. And this all grows out of the fact that religion is the property of the human race. It is not a child of culture. True, one's perception of religion is still human and therefore subject to the bondage of ignorance, the slavery of superstition, the deceptions of sophistication, and the delusions of false philosophy. One of the characteristic peculiarities of genuine religious assurance is that, notwithstanding the absoluteness of its affirmations and the stanchness of its attitude, the spirit of its expression is so poised and tempered that it never conveys the slightest impression of self-assertion or egoistic exultation. The wisdom of religious experience is something of a paradox, in that it is both humanly original and adjuster derivative. Religious force is not the product of the individual's personal prerogatives, but rather the outworking of that sublime partnership of man and the everlasting source of all wisdom. Thus do the words and acts of true and undefiled religion become compellingly authoritative for all enlightened mortals. It is difficult to identify and analyze the factors of a religious experience, but it is not difficult to observe that such religious practitioners live and carry on as if already in the presence of the eternal. Believers react to this temporal life as if immortality already were within their grasp. In the lives of such mortals there is a valid originality and a spontaneity of expression that forever segregate them from those of their fellows who have imbibed only the wisdom of the world. Religionists seem to live in effective emancipation from harrying haste and the painful stress of the vicissitudes inherent in the temporal currents of time. They exhibit a stabilization of personality and a tranquility of character not explained by the laws of physiology, psychology, and sociology. Time is an invariable element in the attainment of knowledge. Religion makes its endowments immediately available, albeit there is the important factor of growth in grace, definite advancement in all phases of religious experience. Knowledge is an eternal quest. Always are you learning, but never are you able to arrive at the full knowledge of absolute truth. In knowledge alone there can never be absolute certainty, only increasing probability of approximation. But the religious soul of spiritual illumination knows, and knows now. And yet this profound and positive certitude does not lead such a sound-minded religionist to take any less interest in the ups and downs of the progress of human wisdom, which is bound up on its material end with the developments of slow-moving science. Even the discoveries of science are not truly real in the consciousness of human experience until they are unraveled and correlated, until their relevant facts actually become meaning through encircuitment in the thought streams of mind. Mortal man views even his physical environment from the mind level, from the perspective of its psychological registry. It is not therefore strange that man should place a highly unified interpretation upon the universe, and then seek to identify this energy unity of his science with the spirit unity of his religious experience. Mind is unity. Mortal consciousness lives on the mind level and perceives the universal realities through the eyes of the mind endowment. The mind perspective will not yield the existential unity of the source of reality, the first source and center, but it can and sometime will portray to man the experiential synthesis of energy, mind, and spirit in and as the Supreme Being. But mind can never succeed in this unification of the diversity of reality unless such mind is firmly aware of material things, intellectual meanings, and spiritual values. Only in the harmony of the triunity of functional reality is there unity, and only in unity is there the personality's satisfaction of the realization of cosmic constancy and consistency. Unity is best found in human experience through philosophy. And while the body of philosophic thought must ever be founded on material facts, the soul and energy of true philosophic dynamics is mortal spiritual insight. Evolutionary man does not naturally relish hard work. To keep pace in his life experience with the impelling demands and the compelling urges of a growing religious experience means incessant activity in spiritual growth, intellectual expansion, factual enlargement, and social service. There is no real religion apart from a highly active personality. Therefore do the more indolent of men often seek to escape the rigors of truly religious activities by a species of ingenious self-deception, through resorting to a retreat to the false shelter of stereotyped religious doctrines and dogmas. But true religion is alive. Intellectual crystallization of religious concepts is the equivalent of spiritual death. You cannot conceive of religion without ideas, but when religion once becomes reduced only to an idea, it is no longer religion. It has become merely a species of human philosophy. Again, there are other types of unstable and poorly disciplined souls who would use the sentimental ideas of religion as an avenue of escape from the irritating demands of living. When certain vacillating and timid mortals attempt to escape from the incessant pressure of evolutionary life, religion, as they conceive it, seems to present the nearest refuge, the best avenue of escape. But it is the mission of religion to prepare man for bravely, even heroically facing the vicissitudes of life. Religion is evolutionary man's supreme endowment, the one thing which enables him to carry on and endure as seeing him who is invisible. Mysticism, however, is often something of a retreat from life, which is embraced by those humans who do not relish the more robust activities of living a religious life in the open arenas of human society and commerce. True religion must act. Conduct will be the result of religion when man actually has it, or rather when religion is permitted truly to possess the man. Never will religion be content with mere thinking or unacting feeling. We are not blind to the fact that religion often acts unwisely, even irreligiously, but it acts. Aberrations of religious conviction have led to bloody persecutions, but always and ever religion does something. It is dynamic. 3. Knowledge, wisdom, and insight. Intellectual deficiency or educational poverty unavoidably handicaps higher religious attainment because such an impoverished environment of the spiritual nature robs religion of its chief channel of philosophic contact with the world of scientific knowledge. The intellectual factors of religion are important, but their overdevelopment is likewise sometimes very handicapping and embarrassing. Religion must continually labor under a paradoxical necessity, the necessity of making effective use of thought while at the same time discounting the spiritual serviceableness of all thinking. Religious speculation is inevitable, but always detrimental. Speculation invariably falsifies its object. Speculation tends to translate religion into something material or humanistic, and thus, while directly interfering with the clarity of logical thought, it indirectly causes religion to appear as a function of the temporal world, the very world with which it should everlastingly stand in contrast. Therefore will religion always be characterized by paradoxes. The paradoxes resulting from the absence of the experiential connection between the material and the spiritual levels of the universe. Urantia mota, the super-philosophic sensitivity for truth discernment and unity perception. Material feelings, human emotions, lead directly to material actions, selfish acts. Religious insights, spiritual motivations lead directly to religious actions, unselfish acts of social service and altruistic benevolence. Religious desire is the hunger quest for divine reality. Religious experience is the realization of the consciousness of having found God. And when a human being does find God, there is experienced within the soul of that being such an indescribable restlessness of triumph and discovery that he is impelled to seek loving service contact with his less illuminated fellows, not to disclose that he has found God, but rather to allow the overflow of the welling up of eternal goodness within his own soul to refresh and ennoble his fellows. Real religion leads to increased social service. Science, knowledge, leads to fact consciousness. Religion, experience, leads to value consciousness. Philosophy, wisdom, leads to coordinate consciousness. Revelation, the substitute for Urantia mota, leads to the consciousness of true reality, while the coordination of the consciousness of fact, value, and true reality constitutes awareness of personality reality, maximum of being, together with the belief in the possibility of the survival of that very personality. Knowledge leads to placing men, to originating social strata and castes. Religion leads to serving men, thus creating ethics and altruism. Wisdom leads to the higher and better fellowship of both ideas and one's fellows. Revelation liberates men and starts them out on the eternal adventure. Science sorts men. Religion loves men, even as yourself. Wisdom does justice to differing men. But revelation glorifies man and discloses his capacity for partnership with God. Science vainly strives to create the brotherhood of culture. Religion brings into being the brotherhood of the Spirit. Philosophy strives for the brotherhood of wisdom. Revelation portrays the eternal brotherhood, the paradise core of the finality. Knowledge yields pride in the fact of personality. Wisdom is the consciousness of the meaning of personality. Religion is the experience of cognizance of the value of personality. Revelation is the assurance of personality survival. Science seeks to identify, analyze, and classify the segmented parts of the limitless cosmos. Religion grasps the idea of the whole, the entire cosmos. Philosophy attempts the identification of the material segments of science with the spiritual insight concept of the whole. Wherein philosophy fails in this attempt, revelation succeeds, affirming that the cosmic circle is universal, eternal, absolute, and infinite. This cosmos of the infinite I Am is therefore endless, limitless, and all-inclusive, timeless, spaceless, and unqualified. And we bear testimony that the infinite I Am is also the Father of Michael of Nebadon and the God of human salvation. Science indicates deity as a fact. Philosophy presents the idea of an absolute. Religion envisions God as a loving, spiritual personality. Revelation affirms the unity of the fact of deity, the idea of the absolute, and the spiritual personality of God, and further presents this concept as our Father, the universal fact of existence, the eternal idea of mind, and the infinite spirit of life. The pursuit of knowledge constitutes science. The search for wisdom is philosophy. The love for God is religion. The hunger for truth is a revelation. but it is the indwelling thought adjuster that attaches the feeling of reality to man's spiritual insight into the cosmos. In science, the idea precedes the expression of its realization. In religion, the experience of realization precedes the expression of the idea. There is a vast difference between the evolutionary will to believe and the product of enlightened reason, religious insight, and revelation, the will that believes. In evolution, religion often leads to man's creating his concepts of God. Revelation exhibits the phenomenon of God's evolving man himself, while in the earth life of Christ Michael, we behold the phenomenon of God's revealing himself to man. Evolution tends to make God manlike. Revelation tends to make man godlike. Science is only satisfied with first causes, religion with supreme personality, and philosophy with unity. Revelation affirms that these three are one, and that all are good. The eternal, real is the good of the universe, and not the time illusions of space evil. In the spiritual experience of all personalities, always is it true that the real is the good, and the good is the real. 4. The fact of experience. Because of the presence in your minds of the thought adjuster, it is no more of a mystery for you to know the mind of God than for you to be sure of the consciousness of knowing any other mind, human or superhuman. Religion and social consciousness have this in common. They are predicated on the consciousness of other-mindedness. The technique whereby you can accept another's idea as yours is the same whereby you may let the mind which was in Christ be also in you. What is human experience? It is simply any interplay between an active and questioning self and any other active and external reality. The mass of experience is determined by depth of concept plus totality of recognition of the reality of the external. The motion of experience equals the force of expectant imagination plus the keenness of the sensory discovery of the external qualities of contacted reality. The fact of experience is found in self-consciousness plus other existences, other thingness, other mindness, and other spiritness. Man very early becomes conscious that he is not alone in the world or the universe. There develops a natural spontaneous self-consciousness of other-mindedness in the environment of selfhood. Faith translates this natural experience into religion, the recognition of God as the reality, source, nature, and destiny of other-mindedness. But such a knowledge of God is ever and always a reality of personal experience. If God were not a personality, he could not become a living part of the real religious experience of a human personality. The element of error present in human religious experience is directly proportional to the content of materialism which contaminates the spiritual concept of the Universal Father. Man's pre-spirit progression in the universe consists in the experience of divesting himself of these erroneous ideas of the nature of God and of the reality of pure and true spirit. Deity is more than spirit, but the spiritual approach is the only one possible to ascending man. Prayer is indeed a part of religious experience, but it has been wrongly emphasized by modern religions, much to the neglect of the more essential communion of worship. The reflective powers of the mind are deepened and broadened by worship. Prayer may enrich the life, but worship illuminates destiny. Revealed religion is the unifying element of human existence. Revelation unifies history, coordinates geology, astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, sociology, and psychology. Spiritual experience is the real soul of man's cosmos. 5. The supremacy of purposive potential. Although the establishment of the fact of belief is not equivalent to establishing the fact of that which is believed, nevertheless the evolutionary progression of simple life to the status of personality does demonstrate the fact of the existence of the potential of personality to start with. And in the time universes, potential is always supreme over the actual. In the evolving cosmos, the potential is what is to be, and what is to be is the unfolding of the purposive mandates of deity. This same purposive supremacy is shown in the evolution of mind ideation, when primitive animal fear is transmuted into the constantly deepening reverence for God and into increasing awe of the universe. Primitive man had more religious fear than faith, and the supremacy of spirit potentials over mind actuals is demonstrated when this craven fear is translated into living faith in spiritual realities. You can psychologize evolutionary religion, but not the personal experience religion of spiritual origin. Human morality may recognize values, but only religion can conserve, exalt, and spiritualize such values. But notwithstanding such actions, religion is something more than emotionalized morality. Religion is to morality as love is to duty, as sonship is to servitude, as essence is to substance. Morality discloses an almighty controller, a deity to be served. Religion discloses an all-loving Father, a God to be worshipped and loved. And again, this is because the spiritual potentiality of religion is dominant over the duty actuality of the morality of evolution. 6. The certainty of religious faith. The philosophic elimination of religious fear and the steady progress of science add greatly to the mortality of false gods. And even though these casualties of man-made deities may momentarily befog the spiritual vision, they eventually destroy that ignorance and superstition which so long obscured the living God of eternal love. The relation between the creature and the Creator is a living experience, a dynamic religious faith which is not subject to precise definition. To isolate part of life and call it religion is to disintegrate life and to distort religion. And this is just why the God of worship claims all allegiance or none. The gods of primitive men may have been no more than shadows of themselves. The living God is the divine light, whose interruptions constitute the creation shadows of all space. The religionist of philosophic attainment has faith in a personal God of personal salvation, something more than a reality, a value, a level of achievement, an exalted process, a transmutation, the ultimate of time-space, an idealization, the personalization of energy, the entity of gravity, a human projection, the idealization of self, nature's upthrust, the inclination to goodness, the forward impulse of evolution, or a sublime hypothesis. The religionist has faith in a God of love. Love is the essence of religion and the wellspring of superior civilization. Faith transforms the philosophic God of probability into the saving God of certainty in the personal religious experience. Skepticism may challenge the theories of theology, but confidence in the dependability of personal experience affirms the truth of that belief which has grown into faith. Convictions about God may be arrived at through wise reasoning, but the individual becomes God-knowing only by faith, through personal experience. In much that pertains to life, probability must be reckoned with. But when contacting with cosmic reality, certainty may be experienced when such meanings and values are approached by living faith. The God-knowing soul dares to say, "I know," even when this knowledge of God is questioned by the unbeliever who denies such certitude because it is not wholly supported by intellectual logic. To every such doubter the believer only replies, "How do you know that I do not know?" Though reason can always question faith, faith can always supplement both reason and logic. Reason creates the probability which faith can transform into a moral certainty, even a spiritual experience. God is the first truth and the last fact. Therefore does all truth take origin in Him, while all facts exist relative to Him. God is absolute truth. As truth, one may know God. But to understand, to explain God, one must explore the fact of the universe of universes. The vast gulf between the experience of the truth of God and ignorance as to the fact of God can be bridged only by living faith. Reason alone cannot achieve harmony between infinite truth and universal fact. Belief may not be able to resist doubt and withstand fear, but faith is always triumphant over doubting, for faith is both positive and living. The positive always has the advantage over the negative, truth over error, experience over theory, spiritual realities over the isolated facts of time and space. The convincing evidence of this spiritual certainty consists in the social fruits of the Spirit which such believers, faithers, yield as a result of this genuine spiritual experience. Said Jesus, "If you love your fellows as I have loved you, then shall all men know that you are my disciples." To science, God is a possibility. To psychology, a desirability. To philosophy, a probability. To religion, a certainty, an actuality of religious experience. Reason demands that a philosophy which cannot find the God of probability should be very respectful of that religious faith which can and does find the God of certitude. Neither should science discount religious experience on grounds of credulity, not so long as it persists in the assumption that man's intellectual and philosophic endowments emerged from increasingly lesser intelligences the further back they go, finally taking origin in primitive life, which was utterly devoid of all thinking and feeling. The facts of evolution must not be arrayed against the truth of the reality of the certainty of the spiritual experience, of the religious living, of the God-knowing mortal. Intelligent men should cease to reason like children, and should attempt to use the consistent logic of adulthood, logic which tolerates the concept of truth alongside the observation of fact. Scientific materialism has gone bankrupt when it persists, in the face of each recurring universe phenomenon, in refunding its current objections by referring what is admittedly higher back into that which is admittedly lower. Consistency demands the recognition of the activities of a purposive creator. Organic evolution is a fact. Purposive or progressive evolution is a truth which makes consistent the otherwise contradictory phenomena of the ever-ascending achievements of evolution. The higher any scientist progresses in his chosen science, the more will he abandon the theories of materialistic fact in favor of the cosmic truth of the dominance of the supreme mind. Materialism cheapens human life. The gospel of Jesus tremendously enhances and supernally exalts every mortal. Mortal existence must be visualized as consisting in the intriguing and fascinating experience of the realization of the reality of the meeting of the human upreach and the divine and saving downreach. 7. The certitude of the divine. The Universal Father, being self-existent, is also self-explanatory. He actually lives in every rational mortal. But you cannot be sure about God unless you know Him. Sonship is the only experience which makes fatherhood certain. The universe is everywhere undergoing change. A changing universe is a dependent universe. Such a creation cannot be either final or absolute. A finite universe is wholly dependent on the ultimate and the absolute. The universe and God are not identical. One is cause, the other effect. The cause is absolute, infinite, eternal, and changeless. The effect, time-space and transcendental, but ever-changing, always growing. God is the one and only self-caused fact in the universe. He is the secret of the order, plan, and purpose of the whole creation of things and beings. The everywhere changing universe is regulated and stabilized by absolutely unchanging laws, the habits of an unchanging God. The fact of God, the divine law, is changeless. The truth of God, His relation to the universe, is a relative revelation, which is ever adaptable to the constantly evolving universe. Those who would invent a religion without God are like those who would gather fruit without trees, have children without parents. You cannot have effects without causes. Only the I am is causeless. The fact of religious experience implies God, and such a God of personal experience must be a personal deity. You cannot pray to a chemical formula, supplicate a mathematical equation, worship a hypothesis, confide in a postulate, commune with a process, serve an abstraction, or hold loving fellowship with a law. True, many apparently religious traits can grow out of non-religious roots. Man can intellectually deny God and yet be morally good, loyal, filial, honest, and even idealistic. Man may graft many purely humanistic branches onto his basic spiritual nature, and thus apparently prove his contentions in behalf of a godless religion. But such an experience is devoid of survival values, God-knowingness, and God-ascension. In such a mortal experience, only social fruits are forthcoming, not spiritual. The graft determines the nature of the fruit, notwithstanding that the living sustenance is drawn from the roots of original divine endowment of both mind and spirit. The intellectual earmark of religion is certainty. The philosophical characteristic is consistency. The social fruits are love and service. The God-knowing individual is not one who is blind to the difficulties or unmindful of the obstacles which stand in the way of finding God in the maze of superstition, tradition, and materialistic tendencies of modern times. He has encountered all these deterrents and triumphed over them, surmounted them by living faith, and attained the highlands of spiritual experience in spite of them. But it is true that many who are inwardly sure about God fear to assert such feelings of certainty because of the multiplicity and cleverness of those who assemble objections and magnify difficulties about believing in God. It requires no great depth of intellect to pick flaws, ask questions, or raise objections. But it does require brilliance of mind to answer these questions and solve these difficulties. Faith certainty is the greatest technique for dealing with all such superficial contentions. If science, philosophy, or sociology dares to become dogmatic in contending with the prophets of true religion, then should God-knowing men reply to such unwarranted dogmatism with that more far-seeing dogmatism of the certainty of personal spiritual experience. I know what I have experienced because I am a son of I am. If the personal experience of a faither is to be challenged by dogma, then this faith-born son of the experienceable Father may reply with that unchallengeable dogma, the statement of his actual sonship with the universal Father. Only an unqualified reality, an absolute, could dare consistently to be dogmatic. Those who assume to be dogmatic must, if consistent, sooner or later be driven into the arms of the absolute of energy, the universal of truth, and the infinite of love. If the non-religious approaches to cosmic reality presume to challenge the certainty of faith on the grounds of its unproved status, then the spirit experiencer can likewise resort to the dogmatic challenge of the facts of science and the beliefs of philosophy on the grounds that they are likewise unproved, They are likewise experiences in the consciousness of the scientist or the philosopher. Of God, the most inescapable of all presences, the most real of all facts, the most living of all truths, the most loving of all friends, and the most divine of all values, we have the right to be the most certain of all universe experiences. 8. The evidences of religion. The highest evidence of the reality and efficacy of religion consists in the fact of human experience, namely, that man, naturally fearful and suspicious, innately endowed with a strong instinct of self-preservation and craving survival after death, is willing fully to trust the deepest interests of his present and future to the keeping and direction of that power and person designated by his faith as God. That is the one central truth of all religion. As to what that power or person requires of man in return for this watch care and final salvation, no two religions agree. In fact, they all more or less disagree. Regarding the status of any religion in the evolutionary scale, it may best be judged by its moral judgments and its ethical standards. The higher the type of any religion, the more it encourages and is encouraged by a constantly improving social morality and ethical culture. We cannot judge religion by the status of its accompanying civilization. We had better estimate the real nature of a civilization by the purity and nobility of its religion. Many of the world's most notable religious teachers have been virtually unlettered. The wisdom of the world is not necessary to an exercise of saving faith in eternal realities. The difference in the religions of various ages is wholly dependent on the difference in man's comprehension of reality, and on his differing recognition of moral values, ethical relationships, and spirit realities. Ethics is the eternal social or racial mirror which faithfully reflects the otherwise unobservable progress of internal spiritual and religious developments. Man has always thought of God in the terms of the best he knew, his deepest ideas and highest ideals. Even historic religion has always created its God conceptions out of its highest recognized values. Every intelligent creature gives the name of God to the best and highest thing he knows. Religion, when reduced to terms of reason and intellectual expression, has always dared to criticize civilization and evolutionary progress as judged by its own standards of ethical culture and moral progress. While personal religion precedes the evolution of human morals, it is regretfully recorded that institutional religion has invariably lagged behind the slowly changing mores of the human races. Organized religion has proved to be conservatively tardy. The prophets have usually led the people in religious development. The theologians have usually held them back. Religion, being a matter of inner or personal experience, can never develop very far in advance of the intellectual evolution of the races. But religion is never enhanced by an appeal to the so-called miraculous. The quest for miracles is a harking back to the primitive religions of magic. True religion has nothing to do with alleged miracles, and never does revealed religion point to miracles as proof of authority. Religion is ever and always rooted and grounded in personal experience. And your highest religion, the life of Jesus, was just such a personal experience. Man, mortal man, seeking God and finding Him to the fullness during one short life in the flesh, while in the same human experience there appeared God, seeking man, and finding Him to the full satisfaction of the perfect soul of infinite supremacy. And that is religion, even the highest yet revealed in the universe of Nebadon, the earth life of Jesus of Nazareth.
Presented by a Melchizedek of Nebadon.
Paper 103. The reality of religious experience. All of man's truly religious reactions are sponsored by the early ministry of the adjutant of worship and are censored by the adjutant of wisdom. Man's first supermind endowment is that of personality encircuitment in the Holy Spirit of the universe creative spirit. And long before either the bestowals of the divine sons or the universal bestowal of the adjusters, this influence functions to enlarge man's viewpoint of ethics, religion, and spirituality. Subsequent to the bestowals of the Paradise Sons, the liberated spirit of truth makes mighty contributions to the enlargement of the human capacity to perceive religious truths. As evolution advances on an inhabited world, the thought adjusters increasingly participate in the development of the higher types of human religious insight. The thought adjuster is the cosmic window through which the finite creature may faith glimpse the certainties and divinities of limitless deity, the universal Father. The religious tendencies of the human races are innate. They are universally manifested and have an apparently natural origin. Primitive religions are always evolutionary in their genesis. As natural religious experience continues to progress, periodic revelations of truth punctuate the otherwise slow-moving course of planetary evolution. On Urantia today, there are 4 kinds of religion. 1. Natural or evolutionary religion. 2. Supernatural or revelatory religion. 3. Practical or current religion, varying degrees of the admixture of natural and supernatural religions. 4. Philosophic religions, man-made or philosophically thought-out theologic doctrines and reason-created religions. 1. Philosophy of religion. The unity of religious experience among a social or racial group derives from the identical nature of the God fragment indwelling the individual. It is this divine in man that gives origin to his unselfish interest in the welfare of other men. But since personality is unique, no 2 mortals being alike, it inevitably follows that no 2 human beings can similarly interpret the leadings and urges of the spirit of divinity which lives within their minds. A group of mortals can experience spiritual unity, but they can never attain philosophic uniformity. And this diversity of the interpretation of religious thought and experience is shown by the fact that 20th century theologians and philosophers have formulated upward of 500 different definitions of religion. In reality, every human being defines religion in the terms of his own experiential interpretation of the divine impulses emanating from the God Spirit that indwells him, and therefore must such an interpretation be unique and wholly different from the religious philosophy of all other human beings. When one mortal is in full agreement with the religious philosophy of a fellow mortal, that phenomenon indicates that these 2 beings have had a similar religious experience touching the matters concerned in their similarity of philosophic religious interpretation. While your religion is a matter of personal experience, it is most important that you should be exposed to the knowledge of a vast number of other religious experiences, the diverse interpretations of other and diverse mortals, to the end that you may prevent your religious life from becoming egocentric, circumscribed, selfish, and unsocial. Rationalism is wrong when it assumes that religion is at first a primitive belief in something which is then followed by the pursuit of values. Religion is primarily a pursuit of values, and then there formulates a system of interpretative beliefs. It is much easier for men to agree on religious values, goals, than on beliefs, interpretations. And this explains how religion can agree on values and goals while exhibiting the confusing phenomenon of maintaining a belief in hundreds of conflicting beliefs, creeds. This also explains why a given person can maintain his religious experience in the face of giving up or changing many of his religious beliefs. Religion persists in spite of revolutionary changes in religious beliefs. Theology does not produce religion. It is religion that produces theologic philosophy. That religionists have believed so much that was false does not invalidate religion, because religion is founded on the recognition of values and is validated by the faith of personal religious experience. Religion, then, is based on experience and religious thought. Theology, the philosophy of religion, is an honest attempt to interpret that experience. Such interpretative beliefs may be right or wrong, or a mixture of truth and error. The realization of the recognition of spiritual values is an experience which is super-ideational. There is no word in any human language which can be employed to designate this sense, feeling, intuition, or experience which we have elected to call God consciousness. The Spirit of God that dwells in man is not personal. The adjuster is prepersonal, but this monitor presents a value, exudes a flavor of divinity, which is personal in the highest and infinite sense. If God were not at least personal, he could not be conscious, and if not conscious, then would he be infrahuman. 2. Religion and the individual. Religion is functional in the human mind and has been realized in experience prior to its appearance in human consciousness. A child has been in existence about 9 months before it experiences birth. But the birth of religion is not sudden. It is rather a gradual emergence. Nevertheless, sooner or later there is a birthday. You do not enter the kingdom of heaven unless you have been born again, born of the Spirit. Many spiritual births are accompanied by much anguish of spirit and marked psychological perturbations, as many physical births are characterized by a stormy labor and other abnormalities of delivery. Other spiritual births are a natural and normal growth of the recognition of supreme values with an enhancement of spiritual experience, albeit no religious development occurs without conscious effort and positive and individual determinations. Religion is never a passive experience, a negative attitude. What is termed the birth of religion is not directly associated with so-called conversion experiences, which usually characterize religious episodes occurring later in life as a result of mental conflict, emotional repression, and temperamental upheavals. But those persons who were so reared by their parents that they grew up in the consciousness of being children of a loving Heavenly Father should not look askance at their fellow mortals who could only attain such consciousness of fellowship with God through a psychological crisis, an emotional upheaval. The evolutionary soil in the mind of man in which the seed of revealed religion germinates is the moral nature that so early gives origin to a social consciousness. The first promptings of a child's moral nature have not to do with sex, guilt, or personal pride, but rather with impulses of justice, fairness, and urges to kindness, helpful ministry to one's fellows. And when such early moral awakenings are nurtured, there occurs a gradual development of the religious life which is comparatively free from conflicts, upheavals, and crises. Every human being very early experiences something of a conflict between his self-seeking and his altruistic impulses, and many times the first experience of God consciousness may be attained as the result of seeking for superhuman help in the task of resolving such moral conflicts. The psychology of a child is naturally positive, not negative. So many mortals are negative because they were so trained. When it is said that the child is positive, reference is made to his moral impulses, those powers of mind whose emergence signals the arrival of the thought adjuster. In the absence of wrong teaching, the mind of the normal child moves positively in the emergence of religious consciousness toward moral righteousness and social ministry, rather than negatively, away from sin and guilt. There may or may not be conflict in the development of religious experience, but there are always present the inevitable decisions, effort, and function of the human will. Moral choosing is usually accompanied by more or less moral conflict, And this very first conflict in the child mind is between the urges of egoism and the impulses of altruism. The thought adjuster does not disregard the personality values of the egoistic motive, but does operate to place a slight preference upon the altruistic impulse as leading to the goal of human happiness and to the joys of the kingdom of heaven. When a moral being chooses to be unselfish when confronted by the urge to be selfish, that is primitive religious experience. No animal can make such a choice. Such a decision is both human and religious. It embraces the fact of God consciousness and exhibits the impulse of social service, the basis of the brotherhood of man. When mind chooses a right moral judgment by an act of the free will, such a decision constitutes a religious experience. But before a child has developed sufficiently to acquire moral capacity and therefore to be able to choose altruistic service, he has already developed a strong and well-unified egoistic nature. And it is this factual situation that gives rise to the theory of the struggle between the higher and the lower natures, between the old man of sin and the new nature of grace. Very early in life, the normal child begins to learn that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Man tends to identify the urge to be self-serving with his ego, himself. In contrast, he is inclined to identify the will to be altruistic with some influence outside himself, God. And indeed is such a judgment right, for all such non-self desires do actually have their origin in the leadings of the indwelling thought adjuster, and this adjuster is a fragment of God. The impulse of the spirit monitor is realized in human consciousness as the urge to be altruistic, fellow creature-minded. At least, this is the early and fundamental experience of the child mind. When the growing child fails of personality unification, the altruistic drive may become so overdeveloped as to work serious injury to the welfare of the self. A misguided conscience can become responsible for much conflict, worry, sorrow, and no end of human unhappiness. 3. Religion and the human race. While the belief in spirits, dreams, and diverse other superstitions all played a part in the evolutionary origin of primitive religions, you should not overlook the influence of the clan or tribal spirit of solidarity. In the group relationship, there was presented the exact social situation which provided the challenge to the egoistic, altruistic conflict in the moral nature of the early human mind. In spite of their belief in spirits, primitive Australians still focused their religion upon the clan. In time, such religious concepts tend to personalize, first as animals, and later as a superman or as a god. Even such inferior races as the African Bushmen, who are not even totemic in their beliefs, do have a recognition of the difference between the self-interest and the group interest, a primitive distinction between the values of the secular and the sacred. But the social group is not the source of religious experience. Regardless of the influence of all these primitive contributions to man's early religion, the fact remains that the true religious impulse has its origin in genuine spirit presences activating the will to be unselfish. Later religion is foreshadowed in the primitive belief in natural wonders and mysteries, the impersonal mana. But sooner or later, the evolving religion requires that the individual should make some personal sacrifice for the good of his social group, should do something to make other people happier and better. Ultimately, religion is destined to become the service of God and of man. Religion is designed to change man's environment, but much of the religion found among mortals today has become helpless to do this. Environment has all too often mastered religion. Remember that in the religion of all ages, the experience which is paramount is the feeling regarding moral values and social meanings, not the thinking regarding theologic dogmas or philosophic theories. Religion evolves favorably as the element of magic is replaced by the concept of morals. Man evolved through the superstitions of mana, magic, nature worship, spirit fear, and animal worship to the various ceremonials whereby the religious attitude of the individual became the group reactions of the clan. And then these ceremonies became focalized and crystallized into tribal beliefs, and eventually these fears and faiths became personalized into gods. But in all of this religious evolution, the moral element was never wholly absent. The impulse of the God within man was always potent. And these powerful influences, one human and the other divine, ensured the survival of religion throughout the vicissitudes of the ages, and that notwithstanding it was so often threatened with extinction by 1,000 subversive tendencies and hostile antagonisms. 4. Spiritual communion. The characteristic difference between a social occasion and a religious gathering is that, in contrast with the secular, the religious is pervaded by the atmosphere of communion. In this way, human association generates a feeling of fellowship with the divine, and this is the beginning of group worship. Partaking of a common meal was the earliest type of social communion, and so did early religions provide that some portion of the ceremonial sacrifice should be eaten by the worshippers. Even in Christianity, the Lord's Supper retains this mode of communion. The atmosphere of the communion provides a refreshing and comforting period of truce in the conflict of the self-seeking ego with the altruistic urge of the indwelling spirit monitor. And this is the prelude to true worship, the practice of the presence of God which eventuates in the emergence of the brotherhood of man. When primitive man felt that his communion with God had been interrupted, he resorted to sacrifice of some kind in an effort to make atonement, to restore friendly relationship. The hunger and thirst for righteousness leads to the discovery of truth, and truth augments ideals. And this creates new problems for the individual religionists, for our ideals tend to grow by geometrical progression, while our ability to live up to them is enhanced only by arithmetical progression. The sense of guilt, not the consciousness of sin, comes either from interrupted spiritual communion or from the lowering of one's moral ideals. Deliverance from such a predicament can only come through the realization that one's highest moral ideals are not necessarily synonymous with the will of God. Man cannot hope to live up to his highest ideals, but he can be true to his purpose of finding God and becoming more and more like him. Jesus swept away all of the ceremonials of sacrifice and atonement. He destroyed the basis of all this fictitious guilt and sense of isolation in the universe by declaring that man is a child of God. The creature-creator relationship was placed on a child-parent basis. God becomes a loving father to his mortal sons and daughters. All ceremonials not a legitimate part of such an intimate family relationship are forever abrogated. God the Father deals with man his child on the basis not of actual virtue or worthiness, but in recognition of the child's motivation, the creature purpose and intent. The relationship is one of parent-child association and is actuated by divine love. 5. The origin of ideals. The early evolutionary mind gives origin to a feeling of social duty and moral obligation derived chiefly from emotional fear. The more positive urge of social service and the idealism of altruism are derived from the direct impulse of the divine spirit indwelling the human mind. This ideal of doing good to others, the impulse to deny the ego something for the benefit of one's neighbor, is very circumscribed at first. Primitive man regards as neighbor only those very close to him, those who treat him neighborly. As religious civilization advances, one's neighbor expands in concept to embrace the clan, the tribe, the nation. And then Jesus enlarged the neighbor scope to embrace the whole of humanity, even that we should love our enemies. And there is something inside of every normal human being that tells him this teaching is moral, right. Even those who practice this ideal least admit that it is right in theory. All men recognize the morality of this universal human urge to be unselfish and altruistic. The humanist ascribes the origin of this urge to the natural working of the material mind. The religionist more correctly recognizes that the truly unselfish drive of mortal mind is in response to the inner spirit leadings of the thought adjuster. But man's interpretation of these early conflicts between the ego will and the other-than-self will is not always dependable. Only a fairly well-unified personality can arbitrate the multiform contentions of the ego cravings and the budding social consciousness. The self has rights as well as one's neighbors. Neither has exclusive claims upon the attention and service of the individual. Failure to resolve this problem gives origin to the earliest type of human guilt feelings. Human happiness is achieved only when the ego desire of the self and the altruistic urge of the higher self, divine spirit, are coordinated and reconciled by the unified will of the integrating and supervising personality. The mind of evolutionary man is ever confronted with the intricate problem of refereeing the contest between the natural expansion of emotional impulses and the moral growth of unselfish urges predicated on spiritual insight, genuine religious reflection. The attempt to secure equal good for the self and for the greatest number of other selves presents a problem which cannot always be satisfactorily resolved in a time-space frame. Given an eternal life, such antagonisms can be worked out, but in one short human life they are incapable of solution. Jesus referred to such a paradox when he said, "Whosoever shall save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for the sake of the kingdom shall find it." The pursuit of the ideal, the striving to be godlike, is a continuous effort before death and after. The life after death is no different in the essentials than the mortal existence. Everything we do in this life which is good contributes directly to the enhancement of the future life. Real religion does not foster moral indolence and spiritual laziness by encouraging the vain hope of having all the virtues of a noble character bestowed upon one as a result of passing through the portals of natural death. True religion does not belittle man's efforts to progress during the mortal lease on life. Every mortal gain is a direct contribution to the enrichment of the first stages of the immortal survival experience. It is fatal to man's idealism when he is taught that all of his altruistic impulses are merely the development of his natural herd instincts. But he is ennobled and mightily energized when he learns that these higher urges of his soul emanate from the spiritual forces that indwell his mortal mind. It lifts man out of himself and beyond himself when he once fully realizes that there lives and strives within him something which is eternal and divine. And so it is that a living faith in the superhuman origin of our ideals validates our belief that we are the sons of God and makes real our altruistic convictions, the feelings of the brotherhood of man. Man, in his spiritual domain, does have a free will. Mortal man is neither a helpless slave of the inflexible sovereignty of an all-powerful God, nor the victim of the hopeless fatality of a mechanistic cosmic determinism. Man is most truly the architect of his own eternal destiny. But man is not saved or ennobled by pressure. Spirit growth springs from within the evolving soul. Pressure may deform the personality, but it never stimulates growth. Even educational pressure is only negatively helpful in that it may aid in the prevention of disastrous experiences. Spiritual growth is greatest where all external pressures are at a minimum. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Man develops best when the pressures of home, community, church, and state are least. But this must not be construed as meaning that there is no place in a progressive society for home, social institutions, church, and state. When a member of a social religious group has complied with the requirements of such a group, he should be encouraged to enjoy religious liberty in the full expression of his own personal interpretation of the truths of religious belief and the facts of religious experience. The security of a religious group depends on spiritual unity, not on theological uniformity. A religious group should be able to enjoy the liberty of free thinking without having to become free thinkers. There is great hope for any church that worships the living God, validates the brotherhood of man, and dares to remove all creedal pressure from its members. 6. Philosophic coordination. Theology is the study of the actions and reactions of the human spirit. It can never become a science, since it must always be combined more or less with psychology in its personal expression and with philosophy in its systematic portrayal. Theology is always the study of your religion. The study of another's religion is psychology. When man approaches the study and examination of his universe from the outside, he brings into being the various physical sciences. When he approaches the research of himself and the universe from the inside, he gives origin to theology and metaphysics. The later art of philosophy develops in an effort to harmonize the many discrepancies which are destined at first to appear between the findings and teachings of these two diametrically opposite avenues of approaching the universe of things and beings. Religion has to do with the spiritual viewpoint, the awareness of the insideness of human experience. Man's spiritual nature affords him the opportunity of turning the universe outside in. It is therefore true that, viewed exclusively from the insideness of personality experience, all creation appears to be spiritual in nature. When man analytically inspects the universe through the material endowments of his physical senses and associated mind perception, the cosmos appears to be mechanical and energy material. Such a technique of studying reality consists in turning the universe inside out. A logical and consistent philosophic concept of the universe cannot be built up on the postulations of either materialism or spiritism, for both of these systems of thinking, when universally applied, are compelled to view the cosmos in distortion, the former contacting with a universe turned inside out, the latter realizing the nature of a universe turned outside in. Never, then, can either science or religion, in and of themselves, standing alone, hope to gain an adequate understanding of universal truths and relationships without the guidance of human philosophy and the illumination of divine revelation. Always must man's inner spirit depend for its expression and self-realization upon the mechanism and technique of the mind. Likewise must man's outer experience of material reality be predicated on the mind consciousness of the experiencing personality. Therefore, are the spiritual and the material, the inner and the outer human experiences, always correlated with the mind function and conditioned as to their conscious realization by the mind activity. Man experiences matter in his mind. He experiences spiritual reality in the soul, but becomes conscious of this experience in his mind. The intellect is the harmonizer and the ever-present conditioner and qualifier of the sum total of mortal experience. Both energy things and spirit values are colored by their interpretation through the mind media of consciousness. Your difficulty in arriving at a more harmonious coordination between science and religion is due to your utter ignorance of the intervening domain of the Urantia world of things and beings. The local universe consists of 3 degrees or stages of reality manifestation: matter, Urantia, and spirit. The Urantia angle of approach erases all divergence between the findings of the physical sciences and the functioning of the spirit of religion. Reason is the understanding technique of the sciences. Faith is the insight technique of religion. Mota is the technique of the Urantia level. Mota is a supermaterial reality sensitivity which is beginning to compensate incomplete growth, having for its substance knowledge reason and for its essence faith insight. Mota is a super-philosophical reconciliation of divergent reality perception, which is non-attainable by material personalities. It is predicated in part on the experience of having survived the material life of the flesh. But many mortals have recognized the desirability of having some method of reconciling the interplay between the widely separated domains of science and religion. And metaphysics is the result of man's unavailing attempt to span this well-recognized chasm. But human metaphysics has proved more confusing than illuminating. Metaphysics stands for man's well-meant but futile effort to compensate for the absence of the mota of Urantia. Metaphysics has proved a failure. Mota man cannot perceive. Revelation is the only technique which can compensate for the absence of the truth sensitivity of mota in a material world. Revelation authoritatively clarifies the muddle of reason-developed metaphysics on an evolutionary sphere. Science is man's attempted study of his physical environment, the world of energy matter. Religion is man's experience with the cosmos of spirit values. Philosophy has been developed by man's mind effort to organize and correlate the findings of these widely separated concepts into something like a reasonable and unified attitude toward the cosmos. Philosophy, clarified by revelation, functions acceptably in the absence of mota and in the presence of the breakdown and failure of man's reason substitute for mota, metaphysics. Early man did not differentiate between the energy level and the spirit level. It was the violet race and their Andite successors who first attempted to divorce the mathematical from the volitional. Increasingly has civilized man followed in the footsteps of the earliest Greeks and the Sumerians, who distinguished between the inanimate and the animate. And as civilization progresses, philosophy will have to bridge ever-widening gulfs between the spirit concept and the energy concept. But in the time of space, these divergencies are at one in the supreme. Science must always be grounded in reason, although imagination and conjecture are helpful in the extension of its borders. Religion is forever dependent on faith, albeit reason is a stabilizing influence and a helpful handmaid. And always there have been, and ever will be, misleading interpretations of the phenomena of both the natural and the spiritual worlds, sciences and religions falsely so called. Out of his incomplete grasp of science, his faint hold upon religion, and his abortive attempts at metaphysics, man has attempted to construct his formulations of philosophy. And modern man would indeed build a worthy and engaging philosophy of himself and his universe were it not for the breakdown of his all-important and indispensable metaphysical connection between the worlds of matter and spirit, the failure of metaphysics to bridge the Urantia gulf between the physical and the spiritual. Mortal man lacks the concept of Urantia mind and material, and revelation is the only technique for atoning for this deficiency in the conceptual data which man so urgently needs in order to construct a logical philosophy of the universe and to arrive at a satisfying understanding of his sure and settled place in that universe. Revelation is evolutionary man's only hope of bridging the Urantia gulf. Faith and reason, unaided by mota, cannot conceive and construct a logical universe. Without the insight of mota, mortal man cannot discern goodness, love, and truth in the phenomena of the material world. When the philosophy of man leans heavily toward the world of matter, it becomes rationalistic or naturalistic. When philosophy inclines particularly toward the spiritual level, it becomes idealistic or even mystical. When philosophy is so unfortunate as to lean upon metaphysics, it unfailingly becomes skeptical, confused. In past ages, most of man's knowledge and intellectual evaluations have fallen into one of these three distortions of perception. Philosophy dare not project its interpretations of reality in the linear fashion of logic. It must never fail to reckon with the elliptic symmetry of reality and with the essential curvature of all relation concepts. The highest attainable philosophy of mortal man must be logically based on the reason of science, the faith of religion, and the truth insight afforded by revelation. By this union, man can compensate somewhat for his failure to develop an adequate metaphysics and for his inability to comprehend the mota of the Urantia. 7. Science and religion. Science is sustained by reason, religion by faith. Faith, though not predicated on reason, is reasonable. Though independent of logic, it is nonetheless encouraged by sound logic. Faith cannot be nourished even by an ideal philosophy. Indeed, it is, with science, the very source of such a philosophy. Faith, human religious insight, can be surely instructed only by revelation, can be surely elevated only by personal mortal experience with the spiritual adjuster presence of the God who is Spirit. True salvation is the technique of the divine evolution of the mortal mind from matter identification through the realms of Urantia liaison to the high universe status of spiritual correlation. And as material intuitive instinct precedes the appearance of reasoned knowledge in terrestrial evolution, so does the manifestation of spiritual intuitive insight presage the later appearance of Urantia and spirit reason and experience in the supernal program of celestial evolution, the business of transmuting the potentials of man the temporal into the actuality and divinity of man the eternal, a paradise finaliter. But as ascending man reaches inward and paradise-ward for the God experience, he will likewise be reaching outward and spaceward for an energy understanding of the material cosmos. The progression of science is not limited to the terrestrial life of man. His universe and superuniverse ascension experience will to no small degree be the study of energy transmutation and material metamorphosis. God is spirit, but deity is unity. And the unity of deity not only embraces the spiritual values of the universal Father and the eternal Son, but is also cognizant of the energy facts of the universal Controller and the Isle of Paradise. While these two phases of universal reality are perfectly correlated in the mind relationships of the conjoint actor and unified on the finite level in the emerging deity of the Supreme Being. The union of the scientific attitude and the religious insight by the mediation of experiential philosophy is part of man's long paradise ascension experience. The approximations of mathematics and the certainties of insight will always require the harmonizing function of mind logic on all levels of experience short of the maximum attainment of the supreme. But logic can never succeed in harmonizing the findings of science and the insights of religion unless both the scientific and the religious aspects of a personality are truth-dominated, sincerely desirous of following the truth wherever it may lead, regardless of the conclusions which it may reach. Logic is the technique of philosophy, its method of expression. Within the domain of true science, reason is always amenable to genuine logic. Within the domain of true religion, faith is always logical from the basis of an inner viewpoint. even though such faith may appear to be quite unfounded from the in-looking viewpoint of the scientific approach. From outward, looking within, the universe may appear to be material. From within, looking out, the same universe appears to be wholly spiritual. Reason grows out of material awareness, faith out of spiritual awareness, but through the mediation of a philosophy strengthened by revelation, logic may confirm both the inward and the outward view, thereby effecting the stabilization of both science and religion. Thus, through common contact with the logic of philosophy, may both science and religion become increasingly tolerant of each other, less and less skeptical. What both developing science and religion need is more searching and fearless self-criticism, a greater awareness of incompleteness in evolutionary status. The teachers of both science and religion are often altogether too self-confident and dogmatic. Science and religion can only be self-critical of their facts. The moment departure is made from the stage of facts, reason abdicates or else rapidly degenerates into a consort of false logic. The truth, an understanding of cosmic relationships, universe facts, and spiritual values, can best be had through the ministry of the Spirit of Truth, and can best be criticized by revelation. But revelation originates neither a science nor a religion. Its function is to coordinate both science and religion with the truth of reality. Always in the absence of revelation, or in the failure to accept or grasp it, has mortal man resorted to his futile gesture of metaphysics, that being the only human substitute for the revelation of truth, or for the mota of Urantia personality. The science of the material world enables man to control, and to some extent dominate, his physical environment. The religion of the spiritual experience is the source of the fraternity impulse which enables men to live together in the complexities of the civilization of a scientific age. Metaphysics, but more certainly revelation, affords a common meeting ground for the discoveries of both science and religion, and makes possible the human attempt logically to correlate these separate but interdependent domains of thought into a well-balanced philosophy of scientific stability and religious certainty. In the mortal state, nothing can be absolutely proved. Both science and religion are predicated on assumptions. On the Urantia level, the postulates of both science and religion are capable of partial proof by mota logic. On the spiritual level of maximum status, the need for finite proof gradually vanishes before the actual experience of and with reality. But even then there is much beyond the finite that remains unproved. All divisions of human thought are predicated on certain assumptions which are accepted, though unproved, by the constitutive reality sensitivity of the mind endowment of man. Science starts out on its vaunted career of reasoning by assuming the reality of three things: matter, motion, and life. Religion starts out with the assumption of the validity of three things: mind, spirit, and the universe, the Supreme Being. Science becomes the thought domain of mathematics, of the energy and material of time in space. Religion assumes to deal not only with finite and temporal spirit, but also with the spirit of eternity and supremacy. Only through a long experience in mota can these two extremes of universe perception be made to yield analogous interpretations of origins, functions, relations, realities, and destinies. The maximum harmonization of the energy-spirit divergence is in the encircuitment of the seven master spirits, the first unification thereof in the deity of the Supreme, the finality unity thereof in the infinity of the first source and center, the I Am. Reason, is the act of recognizing the conclusions of consciousness with regard to the experience in and with the physical world of energy and matter. Faith is the act of recognizing the validity of spiritual consciousness, something which is incapable of other mortal proof. Logic is the synthetic truth-seeking progression of the unity of faith and reason, and is founded on the constitutive mind endowments of mortal beings, the innate recognition of things, meanings, and values. There is a real proof of spiritual reality in the presence of the thought adjuster, but the validity of this presence is not demonstrable to the external world, only to the one who thus experiences the indwelling of God. The consciousness of the adjuster is based on the intellectual reception of truth, the supermind perception of goodness, and the personality motivation to love. Science discovers the material world, religion evaluates it, and philosophy endeavors to interpret its meanings while coordinating the scientific material viewpoint with the religious spiritual concept. But history is a realm in which science and religion may never fully agree. 8. Philosophy and religion. Although both science and philosophy may assume the probability of God by their reason and logic, only the personal religious experience of a spirit-led man can affirm the certainty of such a supreme and personal deity. By the technique of such an incarnation of living truth, the philosophic hypothesis of the probability of God becomes a religious reality. The confusion about the experience of the certainty of God arises out of the dissimilar interpretations and relations of that experience by separate individuals and by different races of men. The experiencing of God may be wholly valid, but the discourse about God, being intellectual and philosophical, is divergent and oftentimes confusingly fallacious. A good and noble man may be consummately in love with his wife, but utterly unable to pass a satisfactory written examination on the psychology of marital love. Another man, having little or no love for his spouse, might pass such an examination most acceptably. The imperfection of the lover's insight into the true nature of the beloved does not in the least invalidate either the reality or sincerity of his love. If you truly believe in God, by faith know Him and love Him, do not permit the reality of such an experience to be in any way lessened or detracted from by the doubting insinuations of science, the cavilling of logic, the postulates of philosophy, or the clever suggestions of well-meaning souls who would create a religion without God. The certainty of the God-knowing religionist should not be disturbed by the uncertainty of the doubting materialist. Rather should the uncertainty of the unbeliever be mightily challenged by the profound faith and unshakable certainty of the experiential believer. Philosophy, to be of the greatest service to both science and religion, should avoid the extremes of both materialism and pantheism. Only a philosophy which recognizes the reality of personality, permanence in the presence of change, can be of moral value to man, can serve as a liaison between the theories of material science and spiritual religion. Revelation is a compensation for the frailties of evolving philosophy. 9. The essence of religion. Theology deals with the intellectual content of religion. Metaphysics, revelation, with the philosophic aspects. Religious experience is the spiritual content of religion. Notwithstanding the mythologic vagaries and the psychologic illusions of the intellectual content of religion, the metaphysical assumptions of error and the techniques of self-deception, the political distortions and the socio-economic perversions of the philosophic content of religion, the spiritual experience of personal religion remains genuine and valid. Religion has to do with feeling, acting, and living, not merely with thinking. Thinking is more closely related to the material life and should be in the main, but not altogether, dominated by reason and the facts of science, and in its non-material reaches toward the spirit realms, by truth. No matter how illusory and erroneous one's theology, one's religion may be wholly genuine and everlastingly true. Buddhism, in its original form, is one of the best religions without a god which has arisen throughout all the evolutionary history of Urantia, although, as this faith developed, it did not remain godless. Religion without faith is a contradiction. Without God, a philosophic inconsistency and an intellectual absurdity. The magical and mythological parentage of natural religion does not invalidate the reality and truth of the later revelational religions and the consummate saving gospel of the religion of Jesus. Jesus' life and teachings finally divested religion of the superstitions of magic, the illusions of mythology, and the bondage of traditional dogmatism. But this early magic and mythology very effectively prepared the way for later and superior religion by assuming the existence and reality of supermaterial values and beings. Although religious experience is a purely spiritual, subjective phenomenon, such an experience embraces a positive and living faith attitude toward the highest realms of universe objective reality. The ideal of religious philosophy is such a faith trust as would lead man unqualifiedly to depend upon the absolute love of the infinite Father of the universe of universes. Such a genuine religious experience far transcends the philosophic objectification of idealistic desire. It actually takes salvation for granted and concerns itself only with learning and doing the will of the Father in paradise. The earmarks of such a religion are faith in a supreme deity, hope of eternal survival, and love, especially of one's fellows. When theology masters religion, religion dies. It becomes a doctrine instead of a life. The mission of theology is merely to facilitate the self-consciousness of personal spiritual experience. Theology constitutes the religious effort to define, clarify, expound, and justify the experiential claims of religion, which in the last analysis can be validated only by living faith. In the higher philosophy of the universe, wisdom, like reason, becomes allied to faith. Reason, wisdom, and faith are man's highest human attainments. Reason introduces man to the world of facts, to things. Wisdom introduces him to a world of truth, to relationships. Faith initiates him into a world of divinity, spiritual experience. Faith most willingly carries reason along as far as reason can go, and then goes on with wisdom to the full philosophic limit. And then it dares to launch out upon the limitless and never-ending universe journey in the sole company of truth. Science, knowledge, is founded on the inherent adjutant spirit assumption that reason is valid, that the universe can be comprehended. Philosophy, coordinate comprehension, is founded on the inherent spirit of wisdom assumption that wisdom is valid, that the material universe can be coordinated with the spiritual. Religion, the truth of personal spiritual experience, is founded on the inherent thought-adjuster assumption that faith is valid, that God can be known and attained. The full realization of the reality of mortal life consists in a progressive willingness to believe these assumptions of reason, wisdom, and faith. Such a life is one motivated by truth and dominated by love. And these are the ideals of objective cosmic reality whose existence cannot be materially demonstrated. When reason once recognizes right and wrong, it exhibits wisdom. When wisdom chooses between right and wrong, truth and error, it demonstrates spirit leading. and thus are the functions of mind, soul, and spirit ever closely united and functionally interassociated. Reason deals with factual knowledge, wisdom with philosophy and revelation, faith with living spiritual experience. Through truth, man attains beauty, and by spiritual love ascends to goodness. Faith leads to knowing God, not merely to a mystical feeling of the divine presence. Faith must not be overmuch influenced by its emotional consequences. True religion is an experience of believing and knowing, as well as a satisfaction of feeling. There is a reality in religious experience that is proportional to the spiritual content, and such a reality is transcendent to reason, science, philosophy, wisdom, and all other human achievements. The convictions of such an experience are unassailable. The logic of religious living is incontrovertible. The certainty of such knowledge is superhuman. The satisfactions are superbly divine, the courage indomitable, the devotions unquestioning, the loyalties supreme, and the destinies final, eternal, ultimate, and universal.
Presented by Melchizedek of Nebadon.
Paper 104. Growth of the Trinity Concept. The Trinity concept of revealed religion must not be confused with the triad beliefs of evolutionary religions. The ideas of triads arose from many suggestive relationships, but chiefly because of the 3 joints of the fingers, because 3 legs were the fewest which could stabilize a stool, because 3 support points could keep up a tent. Furthermore, primitive man for a long time could not count beyond 3. Aside from certain natural couplets, such as past and present, day and night, hot and cold, and male and female, man generally tends to think in triads: yesterday, today, and tomorrow, sunrise, noon, and sunset, father, mother, and child. 3 cheers are given the victor. The dead are buried on the 3rd day, and the ghost is placated by 3 ablutions of water. As a consequence of these natural associations in human experience, the triad made its appearance in religion, and this long before the Paradise Trinity of deities, or even any of their representatives, had been revealed to mankind. Later on, the Persians, Hindus, Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, Romans, and Scandinavians all had triad gods, but these were still not true trinities. Triad deities all had a natural origin, and have appeared at one time or another among most of the intelligent peoples of Urantia. Sometimes the concept of an evolutionary triad has become mixed with that of a revealed trinity. In these instances, it is often impossible to distinguish one from the other. 1. Urantian Trinity Concepts. The first Urantian revelation leading to the comprehension of the Paradise Trinity was made by the staff of Prince Caligastia about 500,000 years ago. This earliest Trinity concept was lost to the world in the unsettled times following the planetary rebellion. The second presentation of the Trinity was made by Adam and Eve in the first and second gardens. These teachings had not been wholly obliterated even in the times of Macaventa Melchizedek, about 35,000 years later, for the Trinity concept of the Sethites persisted in both Mesopotamia and Egypt, but more especially in India, where it was long perpetuated in Agni, the Vedic 3-headed fire god. The third presentation of the Trinity was made by Macaventa Melchizedek, and this doctrine was symbolized by the 3 concentric circles which the sage of Salem wore on his breastplate. But Macaventa found it very difficult to teach the Palestinian Bedouins about the universal Father, the eternal Son, and the infinite Spirit. Most of his disciples thought that the Trinity consisted of the 3 Most Highs of Norlashadek. A few conceived of the Trinity as the system sovereign, the constellation Father, and the local universe creator deity. Still fewer even remotely grasped the idea of the Paradise Association of the Father, Son, and Spirit. Through the activities of the Salem missionaries, the Melchizedek teachings of the Trinity gradually spread throughout much of Eurasia and northern Africa. It is often difficult to distinguish between the triads and the trinities in the later Andite and the post-Melchizedek ages, when both concepts, to a certain extent, intermingled and coalesced. Among the Hindus, the Trinitarian concept took root as being, intelligence, and joy. A later Indian conception was Brahma, Siva, and Vishnu. While the earlier Trinity portrayals were brought to India by the Sethite priests, the later ideas of the Trinity were imported by the Salem missionaries and were developed by the native intellects of India through a compounding of these doctrines with the evolutionary triad conceptions. The Buddhist faith developed two doctrines of a Trinitarian nature. The earlier was teacher, law, and brotherhood. That was the presentation made by Gautama Siddhartha. The later idea, developing among the northern branch of the followers of Buddha, embraced Supreme Lord, Holy Spirit, and Incarnate Savior, and these ideas of the Hindus and Buddhists were real Trinitarian postulates, that is, the idea of a threefold manifestation of a monotheistic God. A true Trinity conception is not just a grouping together of three separate gods. The Hebrews knew about the Trinity from the Kenite traditions of the days of Melchizedek, but their monotheistic zeal for the one God, Yahweh, so eclipsed all such teachings that by the time of Jesus' appearance, the Elohim doctrine had been practically eradicated from Jewish theology. The Hebrew mind could not reconcile the Trinitarian concept with the monotheistic belief in the one Lord, the God of Israel. The followers of the Islamic faith likewise failed to grasp the idea of the Trinity. It is always difficult for an emerging monotheism to tolerate Trinitarianism when confronted by polytheism. The Trinity idea takes best hold of those religions which have a firm monotheistic tradition, coupled with doctrinal elasticity. The great monotheists, the Hebrews and the Mohammedans, found it difficult to distinguish between worshiping three gods, polytheism, and Trinitarianism, the worship of one deity, existing in a triune manifestation of divinity and personality. Jesus taught his apostles the truth regarding the persons of the Paradise Trinity, but they thought he spoke figuratively and symbolically. Having been nurtured in Hebraic monotheism, they found it difficult to entertain any belief that seemed to conflict with their dominating concept of Yahweh, and the early Christians inherited the Hebraic prejudice against the Trinity concept. The first Trinity of Christianity was proclaimed at Antioch and consisted of God, His Word, and His wisdom. Paul knew of the Paradise Trinity of Father, Son, and Spirit, but he seldom preached about it and made mention thereof in only a few of his letters to the newly forming churches. Even then, as did his fellow apostles, Paul confused Jesus, the Creator Son of the local universe, with the second person of deity, the eternal Son of Paradise. The Christian concept of the Trinity, which began to gain recognition near the close of the 1st century after Christ, was comprised of the universal Father, the Creator Son of Nebadon, and the Divine Minister of Salvington, Mother Spirit of the local universe and creative consort of the Creator Son. Not since the times of Jesus has the factual identity of the Paradise Trinity been known on Urantia except by a few individuals to whom it was especially revealed, until its presentation in these revelatory disclosures. But though the Christian concept of the Trinity erred in fact, it was practically true with respect to spiritual relationships. Only in its philosophic implications and cosmological consequences did this concept suffer embarrassment. It has been difficult for many who are cosmic-minded to believe that the second person of deity, the second member of an infinite Trinity, once dwelt on Urantia. And while in spirit this is true, in actuality it is not a fact. The Michael creators fully embody the divinity of the eternal Son, but they are not the absolute personality. 2. Trinity unity and deity plurality. Monotheism arose as a philosophic protest against the inconsistency of polytheism. It developed first through pantheon organizations with the departmentalization of supernatural activities, then through the henotheistic exaltation of one God above the many, and finally through the exclusion of all but the one God of final value. Trinitarianism grows out of the experiential protest against the impossibility of conceiving the oneness of a de-anthropomorphized, solitary deity of unrelated universe significance. Given a sufficient time, philosophy tends to abstract the personal qualities from the deity concept of pure monotheism, thus reducing this idea of an unrelated God to the status of a pantheistic absolute. It has always been difficult to understand the personal nature of a God who has no personal relationships, in equality with other and coordinate personal beings. Personality in deity demands that such deity exist in relation to other and equal personal deity. Through the recognition of the Trinity concept, the mind of man can hope to grasp something of the interrelationship of love and law in the time-space creations. Through spiritual faith, man gains insight into the love of God, but soon discovers that this spiritual faith has no influence on the ordained laws of the material universe. Irrespective of the firmness of man's belief in God as his paradise Father, expanding cosmic horizons demand that he also give recognition to the reality of paradise deity as universal law, that he recognize the Trinity's sovereignty extending outward from paradise and overshadowing even the evolving local universes of the creator sons and creative daughters of the three eternal persons, whose deity union is the fact and reality and eternal indivisibility of the Paradise Trinity. And this selfsame Paradise Trinity is a real entity, not a personality, but nonetheless a true and absolute reality. Not a personality, but nonetheless compatible with coexistent personalities, the personalities of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. The Trinity is a supersummative deity reality, eventuating out of the conjoining of the three paradise deities. The qualities, characteristics, and functions of the Trinity are not the simple sum of the attributes of the three paradise deities. Trinity functions are something unique, original, and not wholly predictable from an analysis of the attributes of Father, Son, and Spirit. For example, the Master, when on earth, admonished his followers that justice is never a personal act. It is always a group function. Neither do the gods, as persons, administer justice, but they perform this very function as a collective whole, as the Paradise Trinity. The conceptual grasp of the Trinity association of Father, Son, and Spirit prepares the human mind for the further presentation of certain other threefold relationships. Theological reason may be fully satisfied by the concept of the Paradise Trinity, but philosophical and cosmological reason demand the recognition of the other triune associations of the first source and center, those triunities in which the infinite functions in various non-Father capacities of universal manifestation, the relationships of the God of force, energy, power, causation, reaction, potentiality, actuality, gravity, tension, pattern, principle, and unity. 3. Trinities and triunities. While mankind has sometimes grasped at an understanding of the Trinity of the three persons of deity, consistency demands that the human intellect perceive that there are certain relationships between all seven absolutes. But all that which is true of the Paradise Trinity is not necessarily true of a triunity, for a triunity is something other than a trinity. In certain functional aspects, a triunity may be analogous to a trinity, but it is never homologous in nature with a trinity. Mortal man is passing through a great age of expanding horizons and enlarging concepts on Urantia, and his cosmic philosophy must accelerate in evolution to keep pace with the expansion of the intellectual arena of human thought. As the cosmic consciousness of mortal man expands, he perceives the interrelatedness of all that he finds in his material science, intellectual philosophy, and spiritual insight. Still, with all this belief in the unity of the cosmos, man perceives the diversity of all existence. In spite of all concepts concerning the immutability of deity, man perceives that he lives in a universe of constant change and experiential growth. Regardless of the realization of the survival of spiritual values, man has ever to reckon with the mathematics and pre-mathematics of force, energy, and power. In some manner, the eternal repleteness of infinity must be reconciled with the time growth of the evolving universes and with the incompleteness of the experiential inhabitants thereof. In some way, the conception of total infinitude must be so segmented and qualified that the mortal intellect and the Urantia soul can grasp this concept of final value and spiritualizing significance. While reason demands a monotheistic unity of cosmic reality, finite experience requires the postulate of plural absolutes and of their coordination in cosmic relationships. Without coordinate existences, there is no possibility for the appearance of diversity of absolute relationships, no chance for the operation of differentials, variables, modifiers, attenuators, qualifiers, or diminishers. In these papers, total reality, infinity, has been presented as it exists in the seven absolutes. 1. The Universal Father. 2. The Eternal Son. 3. The Infinite Spirit. 4. The Isle of Paradise. 5. The Deity Absolute. 6. The Universal Absolute. 7. The Unqualified Absolute. The first source and center, who is Father to the Eternal Son, is also pattern to the Paradise Isle. He is personality unqualified in the Son, but personality potentialized in the Deity Absolute. The Father is energy revealed in Paradise Havona, and at the same time energy concealed in the unqualified Absolute. The infinite is ever disclosed in the ceaseless acts of the conjoint actor, while he is eternally functioning in the compensating but enshrouded activities of the universal absolute. Thus is the Father related to the six coordinate absolutes, and thus do all seven encompass the circle of infinity throughout the endless cycles of eternity. It would seem that triunity of absolute relationships is inevitable. Personality seeks other personality association on absolute as well as on all other levels, and the association of the three paradise personalities eternalizes the first triunity, the personality union of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. For when these three persons as persons conjoin for united function, they thereby constitute a triunity of functional unity, not a trinity, an organic entity, but nonetheless a triunity, a threefold functional aggregate unanimity. The Paradise Trinity is not a triunity, it is not a functional unanimity. Rather, is it undivided and indivisible deity. The Father, Son, and Spirit as persons can sustain a relationship to the Paradise Trinity, for the Trinity is their undivided deity. The Father, Son, and Spirit sustain no such personal relationship to the first triunity, for that is their functional union as three persons. Only as the Trinity, as undivided deity, do they collectively sustain an external relationship to the triunity of their personal aggregation. Thus does the Paradise Trinity stand unique among absolute relationships. There are several existential triunities, but only one existential trinity. A triunity is not an entity, it is functional rather than organic. Its members are partners rather than corporative. The components of the triunities may be entities, but a triunity itself is an association. There is, however, one point of comparison between trinity and triunity. Both eventuate in functions that are something other than the discernible sum of the attributes of the component members. But while they are thus comparable from a functional standpoint, they otherwise exhibit no categorical relationship. They are roughly related as the relation of function to structure, but the function of the triunity association is not the function of the trinity structure or entity. The triunities are nonetheless real. They are very real. In them is total reality functionalized, and through them does the Universal Father exercise immediate and personal control over the master functions of infinity. 4. The seven triunities. In attempting the description of seven triunities, attention is directed to the fact that the Universal Father is the primal member of each. He is, was, and ever will be the first Universal Father Source, Absolute Center, Primal Cause, Universal Controller, Limitless Energizer, Original Unity, Unqualified Upholder, First Person of Deity, Primal Cosmic Pattern, and Essence of Infinity. The Universal Father is the personal cause of the absolutes. He is the absolute of absolutes. The nature and meaning of the seven triunities may be suggested as the first triunity, the personal purposive triunity. This is the grouping of the three deity personalities: 1, the Universal Father; 2, the Eternal Son; 3, the Infinite Spirit. This is the threefold union of love, mercy, and ministry, the purposive and personal association of the three eternal paradise personalities. This is the divinely fraternal, creature-loving, fatherly acting, and ascension-promoting association. The divine personalities of this first triunity are personality-bequeathing, spirit-bestowing, and mind-endowing gods. This is the triunity of infinite volition. It acts throughout the eternal present and in all of the past, present, future flow of time. This association yields volitional infinity and provides the mechanisms whereby personal deity becomes self-revelatory to the creatures of the evolving cosmos. The second triunity, the power pattern triunity. Whether it be a tiny ultimaton, a blazing star, or a whirling nebula, even the central or super-universes, from the smallest to the largest material organization, always is the physical pattern, the cosmic configuration, derived from the function of this triunity. This association consists of 1, the Father-Son; 2, the Paradise Isle; 3, the conjoint actor. Energy is organized by the cosmic agents of the third source and center. Energy is fashioned after the pattern of paradise, the absolute materialization. But behind all of this ceaseless manipulation is the presence of the Father-Son, whose union first activated the paradise pattern in the appearance of Havona, concomitant with the birth of the Infinite Spirit, the conjoint actor. In religious experience, creatures make contact with the God who is love. But such spiritual insight must never eclipse the intelligent recognition of the universe fact of the pattern, which is paradise. The paradise personalities enlist the free will adoration of all creatures by the compelling power of divine love, and lead all such spirit-born personalities into the supernal delights of the unending service of the finaliter sons of God. The second triunity is the architect of the space stage whereon these transactions unfold. It determines the patterns of cosmic configuration. Love may characterize the divinity of the first triunity, but pattern is the galactic manifestation of the second triunity. What the first triunity is to evolving personalities, the second triunity is to the evolving universes. Pattern and personality are two of the great manifestations of the acts of the first source and center. And no matter how difficult it may be to comprehend, it is nonetheless true that the power pattern and the loving person are one and the same universal reality. The Paradise Isle and the Eternal Son are coordinate but antipodal revelations of the unfathomable nature of the universal Father force. The third triunity, the Spirit evolutional triunity. The entirety of spiritual manifestation has its beginning and end in this association, consisting of 1. The Universal Father, 2. The Son Spirit, 3. The Deity Absolute. From spirit potency to paradise spirit, all spirit finds reality expression in this triune association of the pure spirit essence of the Father, the active spirit values of the Son Spirit, and the unlimited spirit potentials of the Deity Absolute. The existential values of spirit have their primordial genesis, complete manifestation, and final destiny in this triunity. The Father exists before Spirit. The Son Spirit functions as active creative Spirit. The Deity Absolute exists as all-encompassing Spirit, even beyond Spirit. The fourth triunity, the triunity of energy infinity. Within this triunity, there eternalizes the beginnings and the endings of all energy reality from space potency to monota. This grouping embraces the following: 1. The Father Spirit, 2. The Paradise Isle, 3. The Unqualified Absolute. Paradise is the center of the force energy activation of the cosmos, the universe position of the first source and center, the cosmic focal point of the Unqualified Absolute, and the source of all energy. Existentially present within this triunity is the energy potential of the cosmos infinite, of which the grand universe and the master universe are only partial manifestations. The fourth triunity absolutely controls the fundamental units of cosmic energy and releases them from the grasp of the Unqualified Absolute in direct proportion to the appearance in the experiential deities of sub-absolute capacity to control and stabilize the metamorphosing cosmos. This triunity is force and energy. The endless possibilities of the Unqualified Absolute are centered around the absolutum of the Isle of Paradise, whence emanate the unimaginable agitations of the otherwise static quiescence of the Unqualified, and the endless throbbing of the material paradise heart of the infinite cosmos beats in harmony with the unfathomable pattern and the unsearchable plan of the infinite energizer, the first source and center. The fifth triunity, the triunity of reactive infinity. This association consists of 1. The Universal Father, 2. The Universal Absolute, 3. The Unqualified Absolute. This grouping yields the eternalization of the functional infinity realization of all that is actualizable within the domains of non-deity reality. This triunity manifests unlimited reactive capacity to the volitional, causative, tensional, and patternal actions and presences of the other triunities. The sixth triunity, the triunity of cosmic associated deity. This grouping consists of 1. The Universal Father, 2. The Deity Absolute, 3. The Universal Absolute. This is the association of deity in the cosmos, the immanence of deity in conjunction with the transcendence of deity. This is the last outreach of divinity on the levels of infinity toward those realities which lie outside the domain of deified reality. The seventh triunity, the triunity of infinite unity. This is the unity of infinity functionally manifest in time and eternity, the coordinate unification of actuals and potentials. This group consists of 1. The Universal Father, 2. The Conjoint Actor, 3. The Universal Absolute. The Conjoint Actor universally integrates the varying functional aspects of all actualized reality on all levels of manifestation, from finites through transcendentals, and on to absolutes. The universal absolute perfectly compensates the differentials inherent in the varying aspects of all incomplete reality, from the limitless potentialities of active, volitional, and causative deity reality to the boundless possibilities of static, reactive, non-deity reality in the incomprehensible domains of the unqualified absolute. As they function in this triunity, the conjoint actor and the universal absolute are alike responsive to deity and to non-deity presences, as also is the first source and center, who in this relationship is, to all intents and purposes, conceptually indistinguishable from the I Am. These approximations are sufficient to elucidate the concept of the triunities. Not knowing the ultimate level of the triunities, you cannot fully comprehend the first seven. While we do not deem it wise to attempt any further elaboration, we may state that there are 15 triune associations of the first source and center, 8 of which are unrevealed in these papers. These unrevealed associations are concerned with realities, actualities, and potentialities which are beyond the experiential level of supremacy. The triunities are the functional balance wheel of infinity, the unification of the uniqueness of the 7 infinity absolutes. It is the existential presence of the triunities that enables the Father I Am to experience functional infinity unity despite the diversification of infinity into 7 absolutes. The first source and center is the unifying member of all triunities. In him all things have their unqualified beginnings, eternal existences, and infinite destinies. In him all things consist. Although these associations cannot augment the infinity of the Father I Am, they do appear to make possible the sub-infinite and sub-absolute manifestations of his reality. The 7 triunities multiply versatility, externalize new depths, deitize new values, disclose new potentialities, reveal new meanings. And all these diversified manifestations in time and space and in the eternal cosmos are existent in the hypothetical stasis of the original infinity of the I Am. 5. Triodities. There are certain other triune relationships which are non-father in constitution, but they are not real triunities, and they are always distinguished from the father triunities. They are called variously associate triunities, coordinate triunities, and triodities. They are consequential to the existence of the triunities. 2 of these associations are constituted as follows. The triodity of actuality. This triodity consists in the interrelationship of the 3 absolute actuals. 1. The eternal Son. 2. The Paradise Isle. 3. The conjoint actor. The eternal Son is the absolute of spirit reality, the absolute personality. The Paradise Isle is the absolute of cosmic reality, the absolute pattern. The conjoint actor is the absolute of mind reality, the coordinate of absolute spirit reality, and the existential deity synthesis of personality and power. This triune association eventuates the coordination of the sum total of actualized reality, spirit, cosmic, or mindal. It is unqualified in actuality. The triodity of potentiality. This triodity consists in the association of the 3 absolutes of potentiality. 1. The deity absolute. 2. The universal absolute. 3. The unqualified absolute. Thus are interassociated the infinity reservoirs of all latent energy reality, spirit, mindal, or cosmic. This association yields the integration of all latent energy reality. It is infinite in potential. As the triunities are primarily concerned with the functional unification of infinity, so are triodities involved in the cosmic appearance of experiential deities. The triunities are indirectly concerned, but the triodities are directly concerned in the experiential deities, supreme, ultimate, and absolute. They appear in the emerging power-personality synthesis of the Supreme Being. And to the time creatures of space, the Supreme Being is a revelation of the unity of the I Am.
Presented by a Melchizedek of Nabadon.
Paper 105, Deity and Reality. To even high orders of universe intelligences, infinity is only partially comprehensible, and the finality of reality is only relatively understandable. The human mind, as it seeks to penetrate the eternity mystery of the origin and destiny of all that is called real, may helpfully approach the problem by conceiving eternity infinity as an almost limitless ellipse which is produced by one absolute cause, and which functions throughout this universal circle of endless diversification, ever seeking some absolute and infinite potential of destiny. When the mortal intellect attempts to grasp the concept of reality totality, such a finite mind is face to face with infinity reality. Reality totality is infinity, and therefore can never be fully comprehended by any mind that is subinfinite in concept capacity. The human mind can hardly form an adequate concept of eternity existences, and without such comprehension, it is impossible to portray even our concepts of reality totality. Nevertheless, we may attempt such a presentation, although we are fully aware that our concepts must be subjected to profound distortion in the process of translation modification to the comprehension level of mortal mind. 1. The philosophic concept of the I Am. Absolute primal causation in infinity, the philosophers of the universes attribute to the universal Father functioning as the infinite, the eternal, and the absolute I Am. There are many elements of danger attendant upon the presentation to the mortal intellect of this idea of an infinite I Am, since this concept is so remote from human experiential understanding as to involve serious distortion of meanings and misconception of values. Nevertheless, the philosophic concept of the I Am does afford finite beings some basis for an attempted approach to the partial comprehension of absolute origins and infinite destinies. But in all our attempts to elucidate the genesis and fruition of reality, let it be made clear that this concept of the I Am is, in all personality meanings and values, synonymous with the first person of deity, the universal Father of all personalities. But this postulate of the I Am is not so clearly identifiable in undeified realms of universal reality. The I Am is the infinite. The I Am is also infinity. From the sequential time viewpoint, all reality has its origin in the infinite I Am, whose solitary existence in past infinite eternity must be a finite creature's premier philosophic postulate. The concept of the I Am connotes unqualified infinity, the undifferentiated reality of all that could ever be in all of an infinite eternity. As an existential concept, the I Am is neither deified nor undeified, neither actual nor potential, neither personal nor impersonal, neither static nor dynamic. No qualification can be applied to the infinite except to state that the I Am is. The philosophic postulate of the I Am is one universe concept which is somewhat more difficult of comprehension than that of the unqualified absolute. To the finite mind there simply must be a beginning, and though there never was a real beginning to reality, still there are certain source relationships which reality manifests to infinity. The pre-reality, primordial eternity situation may be thought of something like this. At some infinitely distant hypothetical past eternity moment, the I Am may be conceived as both thing and no thing, as both cause and effect, as both volition and response. At this hypothetical eternity moment there is no differentiation throughout all infinity. Infinity is filled by the infinite. The infinite encompasses infinity. This is the hypothetical static moment of eternity. Actuals are still contained within their potentials, and potentials have not yet appeared within the infinity of the I Am. But even in this conjectured situation, we must assume the existence of the possibility of self-will. Ever remember that man's comprehension of the Universal Father is a personal experience. God, as your spiritual Father, is comprehensible to you and to all other mortals. But your experiential, worshipful concept of the Universal Father must always be less than your philosophic postulate of the infinity of the first source and center, the I Am. When we speak of the Father, we mean God as He is understandable by His creatures, both high and low. But there is much more of deity which is not comprehensible to universe creatures. God, your Father, and my Father, is that phase of the infinite which we perceive in our personalities as an actual experiential reality. But the I Am ever remains as our hypothesis of all that we feel is unknowable of the first source and center, and even that hypothesis probably falls far short of the unfathomed infinity of original reality. The universe of universes, with its innumerable host of inhabiting personalities, is a vast and complex organism. But the first source and center is infinitely more complex than the universes and personalities which have become real in response to His willful mandates. When you stand in awe of the magnitude of the Master Universe, pause to consider that even this inconceivable creation can be no more than a partial revelation of the infinite. Infinity is indeed remote from the experience level of mortal comprehension, but even in this age on Urantia, your concepts of infinity are growing, and they will continue to grow throughout your endless careers, stretching onward into future eternity. Unqualified infinity is meaningless to the finite creature, but infinity is capable of self-limitation and is susceptible of reality expression to all levels of universe existences. And the face which the infinite turns toward all universe personalities is the face of a Father, the universal Father of love. 2. The I Am as triune and as sevenfold. In considering the genesis of reality, ever bear in mind that all absolute reality is from eternity and is without beginning of existence. By absolute reality we refer to the three existential persons of deity, the Isle of Paradise, and the three absolutes. These seven realities are coordinately eternal, notwithstanding that we resort to time-space language in presenting their sequential origins to human beings. In following the chronological portrayal of the origins of reality, there must be a postulated theoretical moment of first volitional expression and first repercussional reaction within the I Am. In our attempts to portray the genesis and generation of reality, this stage may be conceived as the self-differentiation of the Infinite One from the infinitude. But the postulation of this dual relationship must always be expanded to a triune conception by the recognition of the eternal continuum of the infinity, the I Am. This self-metamorphosis of the I Am culminates in the multiple differentiation of deified reality and of undeified reality, of potential and actual reality, and of certain other realities that can hardly be so classified. These differentiations of the theoretical monistic I Am are eternally integrated by simultaneous relationships arising within the same I Am, the pre-potential, pre-actual, pre-personal, monothetic pre-reality, which, though infinite, is revealed as absolute in the presence of the first source and center, and as personality in the limitless love of the universal Father. By these internal metamorphoses, the I Am is establishing the basis for a sevenfold self-relationship. The philosophic time concept of the solitary I Am and the transitional time concept of the I Am as triune can now be enlarged to encompass the I Am as sevenfold. This sevenfold, or seven-phase nature, may be best suggested in relation to the seven absolutes of infinity. 1. The Universal Father. I am Father of the Eternal Son. This is the primal personality relationship of actualities. The absolute personality of the Son makes absolute the fact of God's fatherhood and establishes the potential sonship of all personalities. This relationship establishes the personality of the infinite and consummates its spiritual revelation in the personality of the original Son. This phase of the I Am is partially experienceable on spiritual levels, even by mortals, who, while yet in the flesh, may worship our Father. 2. The Universal Controller. I am cause of eternal paradise. This is the primal impersonal relationship of actualities, the original non-spiritual association. The Universal Father is God as love. The Universal Controller is God as pattern. This relationship establishes the potential of form, configuration, and determines the master pattern of impersonal and non-spiritual relationship, the master pattern from which all copies are made. 3. The Universal Creator. I am one with the Eternal Son. This union of the Father and the Son, in the presence of paradise, initiates the creative cycle, which is consummated in the appearance of conjoint personality and the eternal universe. From the finite mortal's viewpoint, reality has its true beginnings with the eternity appearance of the Havona creation. This creative act of deity is by and through the God of action, who is, in essence, the unity of the Father-Son manifested on and to all levels of the actual. Therefore is divine creativity unfailingly characterized by unity, and this unity is the outward reflection of the absolute oneness of the duality of the Father-Son and of the Trinity of the Father-Son Spirit. 4. The Infinite Upholder. I am self-associative. This is the primordial association of the statics and potentials of reality. In this relationship, all qualifieds and unqualifieds are compensated. This phase of the I Am is best understood as the universal absolute, the unifier of the deity and the unqualified absolutes. 5. The Infinite Potential. I am self-qualified. This is the infinity benchmark, bearing eternal witness to the volitional self-limitation of the I Am, by virtue of which there was achieved threefold self-expression and self-revelation. This phase of the I Am is usually understood as the deity absolute. 6. The Infinite Capacity. I am static reactive. This is the endless matrix, the possibility for all future cosmic expansion. This phase of the I Am is perhaps best conceived as the supergravity presence of the unqualified absolute. 7. The Universal One of Infinity. I am as I am. This is the stasis or self-relationship of infinity, the eternal fact of infinity reality, and the universal truth of reality infinity. Insofar as this relationship is discernible as personality, it is revealed to the universes in the divine Father of all personality, even of absolute personality. Insofar as this relationship is impersonally expressible, it is contacted by the universe as the absolute coherence of pure energy and of pure spirit in the presence of the Universal Father. Insofar as this relationship is conceivable as an absolute, it is revealed in the primacy of the first source and center. In him we all live and move and have our being, from the creatures of space to the citizens of paradise. And this is just as true of the master universe as of the infinitesimal automaton, just as true of what is to be as of that which is and of what has been. 3. The seven absolutes of infinity. The seven prime relationships within the I Am eternalize as the seven absolutes of infinity. But though we may portray reality origins and infinity differentiation by a sequential narrative, in fact, all seven absolutes are unqualifiedly and coordinately eternal. It may be necessary for mortal minds to conceive of their beginnings, but always should this conception be overshadowed by the realization that the seven absolutes had no beginning. They are eternal, and as such have always been. The seven absolutes are the premise of reality. They have been described in these papers as follows. 1. The first source and center. First person of deity and primal non-deity pattern, God, the Universal Father, Creator, Controller and Upholder, Universal Love, Eternal Spirit, and Infinite Energy, potential of all potentials and source of all actuals, stability of all statics and dynamism of all change, source of pattern and father of persons. Collectively, all seven absolutes equivalate to infinity, but the Universal Father himself actually is infinite. 2. The second source and center. Second person of deity, the eternal and original Son, the absolute personality realities of the I Am, and the basis for the revelation of I Am personality. No personality can hope to attain the Universal Father except through his eternal Son. Neither can personality attain to spirit levels of existence apart from the action and aid of this absolute pattern for all personalities. In the second source and center, spirit is unqualified, while personality is absolute. 3. The paradise source and center. Second non-deity pattern, the eternal Isle of Paradise, the basis for the revelation of I Am force, and the foundation for the establishment of gravity control throughout the universes. Regarding all actualized, non-spiritual, impersonal, and non-volitional reality, paradise is the absolute of patterns. Just as spirit energy is related to the Universal Father through the absolute personality of the Mother Sun, so is all cosmic energy grasped in the gravity control of the first source and center through the absolute pattern of the Paradise Isle. Paradise is not in space. Space exists relative to paradise, and the chronicity of motion is determined through paradise relationship. The eternal isle is absolutely at rest. All other organized and organizing energy is in eternal motion. In all space, only the presence of the unqualified absolute is quiescent, and the unqualified is coordinate with paradise. Paradise exists at the focus of space. The unqualified pervades it, and all relative existence has its being within this domain. 4. The third source and center. Third person of deity, the conjoint actor. Infinite integrator of paradise cosmic energies with the spirit energies of the eternal Son. Perfect coordinator of the motives of will and the mechanics of force. Unifier of all actual and actualizing reality. Through the ministrations of his manifold children, the Infinite Spirit reveals the mercy of the Eternal Son, while at the same time functioning as the infinite manipulator, forever weaving the pattern of paradise into the energies of space. This self-same conjoint actor, this God of action, is the perfect expression of the limitless plans and purposes of the Father-Son, while functioning himself as the source of mind and the bestower of intellect upon the creatures of a far-flung cosmos. 5. The Deity Absolute. The causational, potentially personal possibilities of universal reality, the totality of all deity potential. The Deity Absolute is the purposive qualifier of the unqualified, absolute, and non-deity realities. The Deity Absolute is the qualifier of the absolute and the absolutizer of the qualified, the destiny inceptor. 6. The unqualified absolute. Static, reactive, and abeyant. The unrevealed cosmic infinity of the I Am. Totality of non-deified reality and finality of all non-personal potential. Space limits the function of the unqualified, but the presence of the unqualified is without limit, infinite. There is a concept periphery to the Master Universe, but the presence of the unqualified is limitless. Even eternity cannot exhaust the boundless quiescence of this non-deity absolute. 7. The Universal Absolute. Unifier of the deified and the undeified. Correlator of the absolute and the relative. The Universal Absolute, being static, potential, and associative, compensates the tension between the ever-existent and the uncompleted. The 7 absolutes of infinity constitute the beginnings of reality. As mortal minds would regard it, the first source and center would appear to be antecedent to all absolutes, but such a postulate, however helpful, is invalidated by the eternity coexistence of the Son, the Spirit, the 3 absolutes, and the Paradise Isle. It is a truth that the absolutes are manifestations of the I Am, first source and center. It is a fact that these absolutes never had a beginning, but are coordinate eternals with the first source and center. The relationships of absolutes in eternity cannot always be presented without involving paradoxes in the language of time and in the concept patterns of space. But regardless of any confusion concerning the origin of the 7 absolutes of infinity, it is both fact and truth that all reality is predicated upon their eternity existence and infinity relationships. 4. Unity, duality, and triunity. The universe philosophers postulate the eternity existence of the I Am as the primal source of all reality, and concomitant therewith, they postulate the self-segmentation of the I Am into the primary self-relationships, the 7 phases of infinity. And simultaneous with this assumption is the third postulate, the eternity appearance of the 7 absolutes of infinity and the eternalization of the duality association of the 7 phases of the I Am and these 7 absolutes. The self-revelation of the I Am thus proceeds from static self, through self-segmentation and self-relationship, to absolute relationships, relationships with self-derived absolutes. Duality becomes thus existent in the eternal association of the 7 absolutes of infinity with the 7-fold infinity of the self-segmented phases of the self-revealing I Am. These dual relationships, eternalizing to the universes as the 7 absolutes, eternalize the basic foundations for all universe reality. It has been sometimes stated that unity begets duality, that duality begets triunity, and that triunity is the eternal ancestor of all things. There are indeed 3 great classes of primordial relationships, and they are: 1. Unity relationships. relations existent within the I Am as the unity thereof is conceived as a threefold and then as a sevenfold self-differentiation. 2. Duality relationships. Relations existent between the I Am as sevenfold and the seven absolutes of infinity. 3. Triunity relationships. These are the functional associations of the seven absolutes of infinity. Triunity relationships arise upon duality foundations because of the inevitability of absolute interassociation. Such triunity associations eternalize the potential of all reality. They encompass both deified and undeified reality. The I Am is unqualified infinity as unity. The dualities eternalize reality foundations. The triunities eventuate the realization of infinity as universal function. Pre-existentials become existential in the seven absolutes, and existentials become functional in the triunities, the basic association of absolutes. And concomitant with the eternalization of the triunities, the universe stage is set. The potentials are existent, and the actuals are present, and the fullness of eternity witnesses the diversification of cosmic energy, the outspreading of paradise spirit, and the endowment of mind together with the bestowal of personality, by virtue of which all of these deity and paradise derivatives are unified in experience on the creature level and by other techniques on the supercreature level. 5. Promulgation of finite reality. Just as the original diversification of the I Am must be attributed to inherent and self-contained volition, so must the promulgation of finite reality be ascribed to the volitional acts of paradise deity and to the repercussional adjustments of the functional triunities. Prior to the deitization of the finite, it would appear that all reality diversification took place on absolute levels. But the volitional act promulgating finite reality connotes a qualification of absoluteness and implies the appearance of relativities. While we present this narrative as a sequence and portray the historic appearance of the finite as a direct derivative of the absolute, it should be borne in mind that transcendentals both preceded and succeeded all that is finite. Transcendental ultimates are, in relation to the finite, both causal and consummational. Finite possibility is inherent in the infinite, but the transmutation of possibility to probability and inevitability must be attributed to the self-existent free will of the first source and center, activating all triunity associations. Only the infinity of the Father's will could ever have so qualified the absolute level of existence as to eventuate an ultimate or to create a finite. With the appearance of relative and qualified reality, there comes into being a new cycle of reality, the growth cycle, a majestic downsweep from the heights of infinity to the domain of the finite, forever swinging inward to paradise and deity, always seeking those high destinies commensurate with an infinity source. These inconceivable transactions mark the beginning of universe history, mark the coming into existence of time itself. To a creature, the beginning of the finite is the genesis of reality. As viewed by creature mind, there is no actuality conceivable prior to the finite. This newly appearing finite reality exists in two original phases. 1. Primary maximums, the supremely perfect reality, the Havona type of universe and creature. 2. Secondary maximums, the supremely perfected reality, the superuniverse type of creature and creation. These, then, are the two original manifestations, the constitutively perfect and the evolutionally perfected. The two are coordinate in eternity relationships, but within the limits of time, they are seemingly different. A time factor means growth to that which grows. Secondary finites grow. Hence, those that are growing must appear as incomplete in time. But these differences, which are so important this side of paradise, are non-existent in eternity. We speak of the perfect and the perfected as primary and secondary maximums, but there is still another type. Trinitizing and other relationships between the primaries and the secondaries result in the appearance of tertiary maximums, things, meanings, and values that are neither perfect nor perfected, yet are coordinate with both ancestral factors. 6. Repercussions of finite reality. The entire promulgation of finite existences represents a transference from potentials to actuals within the absolute associations of functional infinity. Of the many repercussions to creative actualization of the finite, there may be cited 1. The deity response, the appearance of the 3 levels of experiential supremacy, the actuality of personal spirit supremacy in Havona, the potential for personal power supremacy in the grand universe to be, and the capacity for some unknown function of experiential mind acting on some level of supremacy in the future master universe. 2. The universe response involved an activation of the architectural plans for the superuniverse space level, and this evolution is still progressing throughout the physical organization of the 7 superuniverses. 3. The creature repercussion to finite reality promulgation resulted in the appearance of perfect beings on the order of the eternal inhabitants of Havona, and of perfected evolutionary ascenders from the 7 superuniverses. But to attain perfection as an evolutionary, time-creative experience implies something other than perfection as a point of departure. Thus arises imperfection in the evolutionary creations, and this is the origin of potential evil. Misadaptation, disharmony, and conflict. All these things are inherent in evolutionary growth, from physical universes to personal creatures. 4. The divinity response to the imperfection inherent in the time lag of evolution is disclosed in the compensating presence of God the Sevenfold, by whose activities that which is perfecting is integrated with both the perfect and the perfected. This time lag is inseparable from evolution, which is creativity in time. Because of it, as well as for other reasons, the almighty power of the Supreme is predicated on the divinity successes of God the Sevenfold. This time lag makes possible creature participation in divine creation by permitting creature personalities to become partners with deity in the attainment of maximum development. Even the material mind of the mortal creature thus becomes partner with the divine adjuster in the dualization of the immortal soul. God the Sevenfold also provides techniques of compensation for the experiential limitations of inherent perfection, as well as compensating the pre-ascension limitations of imperfection. 7. Eventuation of transcendentals. Transcendentals are sub-infinite and sub-absolute, but superfinite and supercreatural. Transcendentals eventuate as an integrating level correlating the supervalues of absolutes with the maximum values of finites. From the creature standpoint, that which is transcendental would appear to have eventuated as a consequence of the finite. From the eternity viewpoint, in anticipation of the finite, and there are those who have considered it as a pre-echo of the finite. That which is transcendental is not necessarily non-developmental, but it is super-evolutional in the finite sense. Neither is it non-experiential, but it is super-experience, as such is meaningful to creatures. Perhaps the best illustration of such a paradox is the central universe of perfection. It is hardly absolute, only the Paradise Isle is truly absolute in the materialized sense. Neither is it a finite evolutionary creation, as are the 7 superuniverses. Havona is eternal, but not changeless in the sense of being a universe of non-growth. It is inhabited by creatures, Havona natives, who never were actually created, for they are eternally existent. Havona thus illustrates something which is not exactly finite, nor yet absolute. Havona further acts as a buffer between absolute paradise and finite creations, still further illustrating the function of transcendentals. But Havona itself is not a transcendental, it is Havona. As the supreme is associated with finites, so the ultimate is identified with transcendentals. But though we thus compare supreme and ultimate, they differ by something more than degree. The difference is also a matter of quality. The ultimate is something more than a super-supreme projected on the transcendental level. The ultimate is all of that, but more. The ultimate is an eventuation of new deity realities, the qualification of new phases of the theretofore unqualified. Among those realities which are associated with the transcendental level are the following. 1. The deity presence of the ultimate. 2. The concept of the master universe. 3. The architects of the master universe. 4. The 2 orders of paradise force organizers. 5. Certain modifications in space potency. 6. Certain values of spirit. 7. Certain meanings of mind. 8. Absonite qualities and realities. 9. Omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. 10. Space. The universe in which we now live may be thought of as existing on finite, transcendental, and absolute levels. This is the cosmic stage on which is enacted the endless drama of personality performance and energy metamorphosis. And all of these manifold realities are unified absolutely by the several triunities, functionally by the architects of the master universe, and relatively by the 7 master spirits, the sub-supreme coordinators of the divinity of God the Sevenfold. God the Sevenfold represents the personality and divinity revelation of the Universal Father to creatures of both maximum and sub-maximum status. But there are other sevenfold relationships of the first source and center which do not pertain to the manifestation of the divine spiritual ministry of the God who is Spirit. In the eternity of the past, the forces of the absolutes, the spirits of the deities, and the personalities of the gods stirred in response to the primordial self-will of self-existent self-will. In this universe age, we are all witnessing the stupendous repercussions of the far-flung cosmic panorama, of the sub-absolute manifestations, of the limitless potentials of all these realities. And it is altogether possible that the continued diversification of the original reality of the first source and center may proceed onward and outward throughout age upon age, on and on, into the faraway and inconceivable stretches of absolute infinity.
Presented by Melchizedek of Nebadon.